No, I think that when someone else is really uncomfortable dealing with it, I just, like, I don't want to let that get to me because I'm not uncomfortable with it. And if I seem uncomfortable talking to them being uncomfortable, then they're going to think that there's a legitimate reason for them to feel uncomfortable with it. You know, because at the same time that I did that other radio show, actually bring something and like perform, and if you have props or whatever, like do an actual performance. And so here I was like gyrating at this like straight male radio host when I was like wearing this huge pink strap on, you know, and he's just like busting up and I want you to, you know, describe very graphically over the radio what you're opening. And so he has to open up this like pink plastic strap on and describe it. And he was great. Like, he was busting up the whole time, but just loved it. He ended up coming and seeing the show, you know, and he was like, "I'm so glad that you were on, that I had you onto the radio, because I would have never even thought to come to this show."
Do you feel like people might perceive you differently than what your show is actually about? And because you talk about being perceived to be straight but being queer identified, but people might see a picture and think, "Oh, here's like a straight young couple or something." But when you're doing a show that's so immensely queer, has that been a problem when you're trying to market to maybe like you want the audience to know it's a queer show?
I mean, I think with our show, like with Traders Without Treason, I think that all of the images that we've put forth about it have been really, really queer, and so like,
there's a pride flag in the middle of one,
right? So like sort of like queer signifiers within that. I think that with that show in particular, that's a little bit different in that I feel like in order at this place in its development, it's really, really salient for queer audiences, and so like we've made decisions to not put it out at another festival in the city that isn't explicitly queer. As from a marketing perspective,
for that
reason, with this particular show, just because it's so entrenched in sort of queer community as it stands right now.
Whereas like for XYT, I really put myself out there normally when I'm, you know, telling people about it, because you know, your average straight person on the street Joe Sixpack, you know, isn't gonna look at me and be like, "No, that's a trans person," you know. It was funny, I was at a party last night and I think some people thought they were complimenting me when they were like, "I would have never guessed that you were trans."
Yeah, that's the popular compliment. It's like, "Oh, I would have never known. You're doing a good job."
Yeah.
Got me fooled.
One over on me. Which I, you know, replied, "Really? I would have never guessed you weren't."
I think the best line with that in particular happened at the Fringe Festival, because it was so big, and so we were performer, and she was like, "Well, you want to tell the story?" It was
It's a great story.
It was the best.
And she was like, "Oh, what show are you with?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm with XYT, you know." And she was like, "Oh, but you're not the performer, right?" I was like, "No, I am." And she said, "But I thought it was performed by a transsexual." I was like, "Yep."
She just
walked away. Just walked away. She didn't say anything else. Like, it was hilarious, which then led to me sometimes when I was like handing out postcards for the show and people would be like, "Oh, what's it about?" Ignoring that it had a little blurb on the back of the postcard. I wrote the show. I'm an avowed transsexual. It's about masculinity, madness, and mayhem. You know,
that sums it up.
The avowed transsexual line was, you know, it was a good way to go about it. And normally people's jaws dropped about there, and just own it.
Yeah, and I think that that sort of people don't get it. They don't get that with you. I think they definitely don't get it with my stuff, with like sort of like my personal work that's sort of about my own experience with gender. It's so far outside of, like, even queer folks don't always get it. Like, I think about, you know, like doing sort of like readings in the city and that sort of thing, and like having people, even by the end of it, not necessarily get that, like, I'll have people be like, "Oh, so you're a trans woman." No, not at all, actually. And sort of like thinking about gender and sort of like the number of transitions that have been involved in my experience. So what do you think I am after you hear this?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen the show that you've done together, but I'm curious as to whether people then know that there's trans issues involved and then expect it all to be like Kestrel's story and not imagine that you have any experience with the transgender a story yourself. Do you feel like that has happened to you, or do you feel frustrated by that kind of idea?
You know, like, we were fags when we got together, not in the factory direct sort way. You know, Kesh was saying, you know, like, you had just stopped being a boy and I had just started, which was true. Like, when we got together, and sort of like what that had meant, that, you know, like, when we got together, we were boys who, like, didn't really pass that point, because I just quit tea and you had not yet started tea, and so we were sort of like boy dyke passing in weird ways, and then within a couple of years you had started tea and I'd quit, like, again.
And your gradual transition to femme with, like, the ripped up jeans,
right,
and the fishnets.
Right.
For the longest time before Sass would wear, first it was that Sass would never wear a skirt, and so Z would wear these ripped up jeans with fishnets under it. And
the same was, like, ripped up pair, because it was really crusty.
That was as femme as Z was going to get, and then Z decided, okay, well, I'll wear skirts, but I'll never wear a dress.
That's what high femmes wear.
It's high femmes wear dresses.
And there's a clear
distinction.
Right.
And then I was like, well, maybe I'm a high femme, and then I wear dresses all the time.
And now Sass lives in dresses. So
but there was, yeah.
And describe it. Yeah, what he said.